Moloch was an ancient Canaanite god. While most knowledge of him has been lost to time, several passages of the Hebrew Bible refer to Moloch as a god of child sacrifice. The bargain: throw your son, your daughter, your child into the furnace, and you will have victory in war. Stop and consider, what would the world look like if this exchange were real? Imagine a few dozen city-states spread across Canaan. Each one has the choice to worship Moloch or reject him. Many of these societies would refuse to make the sacrifice, but some inevitably do. They burn their children alive and, in exchange, are granted victory in war. Worshipping states defeat and subjugate non-worshipping states, and the remaining non-worshippers are further pressured to turn towards Moloch to avoid destruction. Eventually, all of the societies will worship Moloch, and this is where the key idea emerges. Once all of the societies worship him, they no longer gain any advantage in war over their neighbors, but no society can stop worshipping, or they'll be crushed. Moloch promised them power, but in the end they have gained nothing, and lost that which they loved most in the world. No one worships Moloch, the Canaanite god, today, and I doubt any sacrifice made in his name actually benefited anyone. In fact, scholars today question whether Moloch even existed. Nevertheless, the dilemma of worshipping Moloch is one we see repeated all around us. Two nations are in an arms race. When one devotes more of its resources towards its military, the other keeps pace to prevent its rival from seizing an advantage. Both countries spend more and more on tools of war that provide no actual benefit and necessarily less and less on roads, schools, and healthcare. Each nation sacrifices the well-being of its citizens for a military advantage that it never actually achieves. The fishermen on a large lake realize that at the rate they are fishing, the lake will be depleted. Each one of them could choose to limit their catch, but one fisherman won't make a significant difference, and their livelihood would be significantly hurt. Even if the fishermen attempt to coordinate a group effort to reduce overfishing, it will always be in the interest of each individual to defect and reap the profits. So, they each continue to fish at the same rate, eventually wiping out the fish population and ruining their livelihoods. A business owner has the choice to treat his employees well, to pay them a living wage and ensure they're treated fairly, or they could pay them the bare minimum, cut their benefits, and impose difficult working hours and conditions. The businesses that disregard the well-being of their workers in favor of profits outcompete the businesses that spend extra resources accommodating them and eventually drive them out of business or force them to adopt similar standards. At this point, paying poverty wages no longer provides any competitive advantage. All of the other businesses are doing the same thing. But even if every owner is moral and sympathetic, none of them can unilaterally increase wages without being crushed. As consumers of news, we value truth and impartiality, and as producers of news, journalists generally want to produce fair and unbiased reporting. But the stories that sell the most, and the information that spreads the fastest, are those that outrage, titillate, or pander to our in-group biases. And so, news outlets shift towards partisan reporting and clickbait, while the information that spreads through social media is tuned to flatter the views we already hold, or demonize those that we do not. Even as online tools make the truth more accessible than ever before, we find ourselves awash in misinformation and propaganda. In each of these examples, we have struck a bargain with Moloch. And in each of these examples, just as in ancient Canaan, Moloch has exacted a terrible toll, and then left us with nothing. Just as the Canaanites offered their children for power in battle, the nations locked in an arms race offered the well-being of their citizens for military might. Just as the worship of Moloch eventually became ubiquitous, The fishermen all chose to overfish instead of preserve the lake's ecosystem. Just as the tribes no longer gained anything from their sacrifices once all of them turned to Moloch, the business owner no longer gains an advantage from mistreating their employees. Just as worshippers can never cease their devotion without facing destruction, a news outlet cannot return to higher standards of journalism without being outcompeted. And just as the ancient followers of Moloch were immiserated, so we are immiserated, because we are also followers of Moloch. Perhaps the greatest irony is that all of these seemingly intractable problems all have easy solutions. The nations stuck in an arms race could simply agree to disarm. The fishermen could agree to reduce their catch to a sustainable level. The business owners could agree to treat their employees with compassion. The news agencies could agree to improve their standards. But of course, absent some organizing force, these agreements rarely come to pass, and these types of problems are the biggest we face today. We see Moloch in political polarization, climate change, the destruction of natural resources, income inequality, and the threat of war. Moloch is the mechanism of our suffering and the greatest threat to our future. I don't mean to imply an ancient Canaanite god is somehow causing overfishing. Moloch, as I have described him, is a kind of system. The same type of system that would lead followers of a god to sacrifice their children also leads to overfishing, poverty wages, and online misinformation. So what is Moloch? Human beings have a wide range of values: safety, freedom, justice, compassion, order, creativity. While different individuals in different circumstances might weigh them differently, we generally acknowledge that most situations call for a balance of multiple values. For example, when sentencing a criminal, the value of justice is clearly important, but so is compassion for the circumstances of the accused. We acknowledge the dignity of every human being by forbidding cruel and unusual punishment, while also considering the fairness of a potential punishment in light of the severity of the crime. In contrast, Moloch is a system of intense competition that optimizes for one value. Consider the example of the business owner deciding how to treat their employees. If we ask, what makes a business good, we might apply a range of human values. The business should be reliable, fair, and truthful. It should act with integrity and respect for its employees and customers. It should give back to the community. It should avoid causing harm, and it should pursue sustainable practices. However, if we ask what makes a business successful, the answer is much more straightforward. Businesses are successful when they can generate profits. It doesn't matter how well or badly a business treats its employees or how much it does or doesn't give back to the community. The success of a business is measured in its profits. As a result, if businesses find a way to increase profits, they will do so, even at the cost of these other values. And any businesses that refuse will find themselves outcompeted and eventually destroyed. Therefore, we can expect businesses will pay as little as they can get away with, deceive and manipulate their customers when they can escape consequences, and only consider their environmental and social impact when doing so is profitable. In this case, Moloch is a system that optimizes for profit over all other values. In war, Moloch is a system that optimizes for strength over all other values. In genetics and memetics, Moloch is a system that optimizes for propagation over all other values. In all of these systems, as agents optimize for one value that ensures their survival, they naturally begin to sacrifice their other values. Yet because all of the agents are making similar sacrifices, none of them sees any permanent advantage. In these systems, we sacrifice more and more of what we value for power that never really appears. Through Moloch, not only are we immiserated, we are complicit in our own immiseration. The ideas in this video are largely based on the essay Meditations on Moloch by Scott Alexander on his blog Slate Star Codex. Follow the link in the description to read more about the concept of Moloch. Creating these video essays is something of an experiment for me. If you found this video valuable, you can let me know by liking it, subscribing, or commenting. Your feedback will help inform the direction I go with this channel. Finally, I leave you with an excerpt from part 2 of the poem Howl by Allen Ginsberg. You can find a link to the entire reading in the description below.
Moloch, solitude, filth, ugliness, ash cans and unobtainable dollars. Children screaming under the stairways, boys sobbing in armies, old men weeping in the parks. Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch. Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch. Moloch the heavy judger of men. Moloch the incomprehensible prison. Moloch the crossbone soulless jailhouse and congress of sorrows. Moloch whose buildings are judgment. Moloch the vast stone of war. Moloch the stunned governments. Moloch whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch whose blood is running money. Moloch whose fingers are 10 armies. Moloch whose breast is a cannibal dynamo. Moloch whose ear is a smoking tomb. Moloch whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows. Moloch whose skyscrapers stand